Let's talk about 5 common infrastructure as code security issues that I see teams struggling with. And let me ask you this, can you answer all these questions right now with your current setup? Like, who changed the production database config last Tuesday? Or do you know if you have any configuration drift? Can you show me all of your access controls and who in the organization can access what? Or are there any hard-coded secrets in your IAC repos? If you can't answer every single one of those questions, you've got gaps that will fail your next audit. So stick around and watch this video where I'll show you some solutions and approaches that you can implement in your environment so that by the end, you're able to answer those questions confidently. And let's start with the first issue. This is one of the biggest ones that I see teams struggling with when they first set up infrastructure as code for their cloud deployments. They deployed that Terraform code perfectly 3 months ago, and it was beautiful, but now it's completely different and you have no idea what happened. And by the way, this applies regardless of whether you're using Terraform or not. I'm just referring to it because it's the most popular. So someone made a manual change in the console, or they made an emergency fix that they never documented, and suddenly your production environment is nothing like your code. You've got security groups with random open ports, you've got resources with missing tags and no clue who deployed them, and you've got compliance dashboards that are showing failures. So how do we fix it and how do we prevent it? Well, most teams don't have any automatic way of handling this, at least not at first, and so here's the approach that I would recommend. And I'm showing you using a platform called Spacelift because they're sponsoring this video, but you can use something else if you prefer. Just watch my approach and then apply it whichever way is best for you in your environment. And if you want to try Spacelift, you can do exactly what I'm doing on screen because they do have a free 14-day trial that you can get here. Okay, so first you need to enable the drift detection feature in whatever platform you're using to manage your IAC. So in Spacelift, you can do that by going to Stacks. Then you select a stack, which represents your IAC deployment. You click on scheduling, and then you create a schedule for drift detection. Here you'll set your schedule as a basic cron expression, and then you'll create it. And so essentially this will compare what you deployed with what you have in the environment. And so even if you're not using Spacelift, you need something that gives you this visibility. And then once enabled, you can head over to resources in the dashboard and filter by drifted. This will only show you the resources that have drifted so you can focus your attention. So here we can see that I have 2 different drifted resources and it tells me exactly which ones. It's my S3 bucket and ECS. So now I can decide if I want to keep that drift or if I need to revert it back. But either way, I know that it's there. So you need some sort of automated mechanism that looks for drift because this will make your life so much easier in the long run. And then you can also deploy policy enforcement that prevents non-compliant changes before they even happen, which leads me to the second issue, which is not having policy as code. Without this, teams can just deploy whatever they want and however they want, and you only find out about the problems when it's already too late. But the challenge here is that some security teams will overreact to this and they'll lock everything down and require explicit approval for your devs to be able to deploy even just basic resources in their own dev accounts. And that just ends up slowing everything down. So instead, you can use policy as code and you can start small and then expand from there. So here are some examples that I've personally seen that could have been avoided if the organization was using policy as code. The first example is employees launching massive instances resulting in thousands of dollars wasted when a much cheaper instance should have been used instead. Or breaches happening through databases that were made public with misconfigurations. S3 buckets being breached also through misconfigurations. Or even just a complete lack of tags on resources that were deployed, which creates nightmares down the road. So in Spacelift, they use something called Open Policy Agent, or OPA, in order to handle this. And OPA is an open source policy engine that you can use for all sorts of things, including for your IAC. So this is something you can deploy even if you're not using Spacelift, and basically you write policies that check your IAC plans before they get deployed. And let me show you exactly how to set this up from scratch. We're going to write a policy that prevents anyone from creating S3 buckets that are publicly accessible. So I've got a little bit of Terraform code here. We just have a main file with an S3 bucket called mySuperPublicBucket. And then below that, we are configuring the public access block settings. So here we have block public ACLs, block public policy, ignore public ACLs, and restrict public buckets, and they're all set to false, which if we want to make this bucket public, then maybe that's something we could look at. But for most use cases, when we don't want to make our data and buckets public, then we definitely don't want to see this being deployed to our production environments. So this is a bad configuration, and we want to catch it with OPA. So separately, I have this policy file that I've pre-created, and all we're doing here is we're checking for two things. Both of them are looking at our resource type. That's going to be this resource type right here, but they're looking for slightly different things. The first one is looking for block public ACLs, which is this setting right here. And then the second one is block public policy, which is going to be the second setting. So we're not looking at these two. Of course, we probably would want to do that. So we'd want to modify this policy. But for right now, if either of those are set to false, which they are, then we want to print this message that will give us the actual S3 bucket name. And it will say that it allows public ACLs, which creates a security risk. So we want to block that. So let's actually run this and let's see it in action. The first step we need to take is we need to run Terraform plan and then out equals TF plan. This basically tells Terraform to figure out exactly what it wants to create, modify, or destroy, and then save that plan to a binary file called TF plan. And so this is what OPA can actually look at. Except the TF plan file is in Terraform's own binary format that OPA is not able to read. So we need to translate it to JSON. And we can do that by typing show JSON TF plan and then output that as plan.json. Then we can execute with OPA exec and we'll pass in our plan.json. We'll press enter and it's very, very fast. We can see the result right away. So we have both of these are raising flags and saying that we've got a misconfiguration. Now, if I modify that, so if I pull up the code really quickly and we modify the main file, and let's just try one for now. So I'll set this to true. Now we have to re-export those files we were looking at before, the plan file, and then convert it back again. This time, if I run OPA, now I only get one failure. And finally, if I change this to true and do the same thing again. And so we are good to go. Now, of course, like I said before, these two should also be set to true. So we'd want to modify our policy in order to catch that. But now you can see exactly, at least as an example, how this would work in practice. But there's a better way to do this, and let me show you in the Spacelift dashboard. In our dashboard here, they've pre-created templates that we can easily import and use on our stacks. So I'll head over to policies, and then I can switch over to the templates tab to look for those pre-created OPA templates. And if you know me, then you know that I'm a broken record on never using IAM access keys or AWS IAM users. So the first one that I would implement is looking at the disallow AWS IAM access key creation. If we expand it, we can see the policy and exactly how it works, and also how we can customize it. We can then import it and use it for our stacks. Earlier, I also gave the example of launching large instances, so we could use the enforce instance type template to fix that problem. Opening it up, we can see a deny list as well as an allow list, and we then have an example of how to straight up deny the launch versus if we want to just warn the user that the instance type is not in either list, then we can do that as well. Another example I gave was a lack of tags, so we could use the enforce tags on resources template for that very purpose. Here we can set required tag values, and so if a resource being deployed does not have these required tags, then it won't allow you to deploy them. Now, even though there are more examples that we could look at and I'd love to show you, I think that you get the idea by now, so let's go ahead and move on. But regardless of how you implement it, I would highly recommend adding policy as code to your IAC. Try it out, and I bet you'll love it. But just make sure that you start small and then you expand over time. This is a multi-month to a multi-year project. Okay, so we've talked about drift and we've talked about policy as code. Now let's talk about the third issue in our list, which is a lack of audit trails. And this one is self-explanatory, but it's actually harder to do than it sounds because you need a complete audit trail that captures everything automatically. And this will help you answer the auditor question of, hey, show me who changed your production database configuration last Tuesday, what they changed, and why they changed it. So you need something that automatically keeps track of all infrastructure related changes, which in Spacelift is in the audit trail. And I can find that by clicking on my username and then going to audit trail. Here I can see a complete log of all actions that were taken with what changed, how it was executed, who made the change, and when it happened. And you can click on any entry in this page to see the full context. You can even export these logs directly to your compliance tools or just dump them into long-term storage, like in S3, for example. But if you're not using a platform like this, I don't really have a great answer for you because you'll probably have to just string along a bunch of different services in order to get a similar outcome. Like you'll probably need cloud provider logs, the GitHub logs, Jira tickets, etc. But yeah, this one's definitely very important. I highly recommend that you look into it to make your audits much easier. All right, so time for the fourth one. And I've got a quick question for you here. Can your intern accidentally delete production? Now, I know that the intern always gets the blame, but if you're sitting there going, maybe, then you've got an access problem on your hands. So what's the fix? Well, you need proper role-based access control. And at a bare minimum, you need a role with view only or read only, one with read and write abilities, and then one with admin abilities. Ideally, though, you go even more fine-grained than that. And so in Spacelift, you can do that by using what they call spaces. Here's how you would set that up. You'd go to spaces in the dashboard and you create different spaces for different environments. Like you could have a development environment and you could use this to give your devs access so they can break stuff and learn, but not do so in production. You could have a staging space where you could set up access for final checks. And then we'd have a production space, which is of course read-only except for emergencies, with very few people or systems having that ability. Now, within each space, you can assign different roles. You could have read-only, which can view plans, logs, and resources. You can have contributors that can trigger runs and create PRs. You could have administrators that can approve changes and override policies as needed. And you could have auditors that get read-only access to everything, including the logs. And by the way, Spacelift also recently launched the Advanced Access Control, or AAC, which is fine-grained and role-based permissions that go beyond the old read, write, and admin boundaries. So now you can break traditional roles into individual composable actions, and you can create custom roles that match your exact organizational needs. But to recap in this section here, at a minimum, you need to at least have read, write, and admin roles to start if you don't already have that, and then you can be more specific. But before we wrap up, there's one more thing that can completely wreck everything we just built, which is hard-coded secrets in your IAC. So multiple times a year, we'll see database passwords, API keys, and even AWS admin credentials just sitting there in Terraform files and committed to GitHub for the whole world to see. It's getting even worse now with vibe coding, where I've actually seen an LLM try to set my repo to be public when I was just asking it to make a quick change to the config. If I had not double checked, which a lot of people probably don't, then my repo would have been made public. And then after that, it only takes a minute for threat actors to find them because they have automated bots that are scraping all the time and that are looking for leaks. So you want to make sure that you never ever store secrets directly in your IAC code and instead use proper secret management services. If there is interest in this, I'll make a whole separate video on this because it is a very important topic, but also check out my profile because we've got a video explaining HashiCorp Vault in 180 seconds. All right, let's wrap this up. We've covered 4 different security issues plus a bonus that are commonly found with infrastructure as code. If you want to try out Spacelift, they do have that free 14-day trial, and you can find the link in the description. Otherwise, make sure you walk away from this video with a concrete action plan and take it back to your team. But I'm curious, what's your biggest IAC audit challenge? Drop it in the comments below and subscribe for more cloud security content that keeps you ahead of both threats and auditors. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next video.